Okay, so in this session, we're going to look at Kundalini and essentially what this is and what this isn't. Because when we're looking at Qi deviations, one thing that's going to come up a lot is people are going to say they have Kundalini sickness. And it's a name that sometimes people equate with dragon sickness within Chinese arts, say they're similar. People will talk about Kundalini sickness, or people will talk about having had a Kundalini experience, I suppose, or something, and then kind of saying that they've had problems from this. Now, obviously, to me, when somebody says that they have... Oh, can you hear okay? Somebody's pointing at their ears again. Can you hear? Sounds all right, is it? Okay, all right. Oh, maybe it's just them. I don't know. Okay. So, when people say to me Kundalini sickness or Kundalini syndrome or a Kundalini problem or experience, I always assume they mean yoga, but, sort of Hindu arts. But I have discovered now increasingly that actually the term Kundalini has kind of been spread into other traditions as well, isn't it? Into everything from some Qigong schools have adopted the term through to just kind of new age things that have been created in modern times. People have just sort of adopted that word. But obviously, the idea of Kundalini comes from yogic traditions originally, yeah? So what we need to do really is we need to develop an understanding of what Kundalini actually is, because the phrase of Kundalini has obviously now been used to discuss a lot of different things. People are using it to discuss anything from literally an awakening experiences through to something that just feels like it moved up through the spine. Or I've seen people equating spontaneous movement, Qigong, with Kundalini before now as well, and it's not. They're very, very different things. So for me, I'm always a stickler for terms, as you know. So if you're discussing something that has a traditional aspect to it, like Kundalini, then to me, the literal definition of Kundalini is what is important. What are they actually discussing, rather than the kind of sort of generic use of the term. Because I guess if somebody did have a Kundalini sickness, it would be a really big deal. It would be a really, really big deal. So I need to be able to differentiate, or anybody within these internal arts needs to be able to differentiate the difference between an actual Kundalini sickness or something else. Because there are various things that people generally mistake for Kundalini sickness or mistakenly label. So I'm sure you'll have a little bit of understanding of what Kundalini might be, but maybe you don't have an understanding of what it's for. Like, people have different concepts of such things. I don't want to make it into hours and hours and hours. This is one of those 8-hour ones, isn't it? Just like karma. So that's not going to happen. But I will go into it a little bit, but I won't. I'll try not to go into excruciating detail, but just to give you an understanding what Kundalini is from its traditional sense, because it was something that I really wanted to understand for sure when I was getting involved in these arts, because it was something that comes up so often. But before we understand the Kundalini, really I think we can break down spiritual methods into 3 key paths, 3 key ways of working, as far as I can see. Yeah, and funnily enough, no, I'll leave that. That's complex. Let's just talk about three paths. Let's keep it simple. So the first one would be something that is more akin perhaps to Buddhism, or not. Buddhism is a wide term, isn't it? But I guess if we take away all of the unusual branches of Buddhism, the kind of ones that have gone off and developed different ways of working, we look at the kind of the core teachings of Buddhism, which would be based around developing the qualities of Vipassana and Sati and so on and so on, this kind of sort of direct path through Buddhism. Then essentially we could say that this is a path that leads to, using the English word, it would be enlightenment, or to use the classical term, I guess it would be sort of moksha, or liberation, essentially, to achieve this particular state where you free yourself from the wheel of samsara, ultimately is the idea. So on a path like this within Buddhism, ultimately through insight and analysis and clarity in developing the correct mental qualities, that there is a severing of the ties into that cycle until someone achieves liberation from that cycle, right? That's ultimately what they're aiming to achieve at the highest levels. So I would put sort of more direct paths of Buddhism in that category. I would also possibly put Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta type traditions in that line as well, because although they have a slightly more intellectual take on it, it's still based on insight and analysis and kind of developing, penetrating comprehension of the nature of spirit and self, really, and to get through to that core. So you have those kind of traditions. Those traditions don't rely heavily on energy work, do they? Not really. Like, it's not something they discuss too much. They don't talk about channels too much, or dantian, or even chakra particularly, or anything like this. They simply refer to the mind. And then if they are talking about energetics, they're kind of mentioned in brief. It's not a big deal. Often as a byproduct of that work, if someone gets to a high enough level, there are all kinds of energetic transformations that take place, but it's a byproduct of that. Yeah, it's more about that developing of insight into the nature of truth. Then you have the second path. The second way is more like Hinduism. I would say a lot of Hinduism, especially ones that are based upon deities, upon the word has escaped me momentarily, but worship of deities, and this kind of path, or Christianity, or worship of God, or the Abrahamic religions, bhakti is the term that escaped me there, and these kind of traditions, yeah. These traditions are based very much upon, ultimately, eradicating the self so you achieve union with the highest part of yourself through the vehicle of normally service and reverence and giving yourself up to someone, a form of devotion, right? Do you understand that? So there are two different paths. Now, ultimately, this second path leads to a unification with God. So, according to their teachings. So instead of freeing the person from samsara, that is not something that they are aiming for. They are simply aiming to express and connect to the divine whilst in the living body. So it is different. It is a different path. Yeah. Now in yoga, yogic traditions, they understand this because these would be the first two of the kriya actions, aspects of path. Because we have 3 kriya paths, okay, in traditional yoga, which would be, kriya means action, ultimately a way to achieve something. The first kriya, K-R-I-Y-A, not career, I'm not talking about a job. Your first kriya would be the kriya of devotion, ultimately, which would be the path I link to Christianity, many Abrahamic religions, and many sort of Hindu bhakti-based traditions and worship-based traditions. And then the second action-based kriya would be renunciation, ultimately, which is more in line with the Buddhist path, to renounce the connection to anything that is going to stop you achieving the insight that's going to escape from samsara. Yeah, so these are 2 different paths that Hinduism recognized, epitomized by these different traditions. Now, most people would associate spiritual practice with one of those 2 paths, wouldn't they? Generally, I would assume. Like, normally that's what people are talking about, isn't it? They're normally talking about devotion or religion, ultimately, or they're talking about insight and vipassana and meditation, which is the second one. But you don't require both components for either path. For example, the devotional path doesn't require meditation, does it? As far as I can see, it doesn't require it. Normally it's prayer, normally it's reverence. Sometimes they might use something similar, but it's not a required component of what they do. For the meditation path, they don't necessarily require devotion. Sometimes there's a crossover, but ultimately the core of what they're doing is not about faith or reverence. Buddha, for example, did not require anybody to worship anything or worship anybody, right? That wasn't the idea. It was about insight into the nature of self and truth, yeah, into the fabrications of existence. With me so far? So they lead to different things. They don't lead to the same thing, right? They don't lead to the same state. That might be confusing for people, but they are not the same thing. So, for example, someone that follows the path of Jesus to the letter, perfectly, or the path of worshipping Shiva within Shivite tradition, is not going to achieve the same as somebody that went to the highest level of the Buddhist path and followed the teachings of Buddha. They just would not. That is a Western concept, or a modern concept, I should say, that we assume these paths are the same and lead to the same place. They don't. So a part of the issue is that people have crossed them so much, right? sort of intertwined and intertangled them, and sometimes it's difficult to kind of pull them apart a little bit and kind of see which one does what is the causative chain that leads to here. Now the third Kriya action path, is normally associated with education of self, meaning the study of the body, ultimately, the study of that which you own temporarily, that which you are contained within. A path like Taoism is more in line with that tradition, usually. Certainly alchemical paths, Qigong paths, and things like this are based on this. So is yoga, the yogic path, something based around asana, which prepares you for, amongst other things, pranayama and things like this, and then ultimately Kundalini awakening, if you're within certain traditions, would be a third path. It is not meditation, it is not devotion, it is the study of potential contained within the body. It is a third type of Kriya action path within yogic traditions. Do you understand the difference? Yeah. This third path achieves spiritual liberation by ultimately taking the physical body and the energetic body to the highest level of functioning that is possible. Ultimately, to me, they are paths of efficiency. It's how efficient can I make the body function? How efficient can I make the nervous system function? How efficient can I make the energy system function? How efficiently can I make yin and yang harmonize within the body? But it is a path that is based upon form, that which you have. What it leads to is a very different aim again, because what do we have with the stories within paths like Kundalini and pranayamic paths and alchemy paths? We talk about longevity, immortality. Immortality and enlightenment are not the same thing. Immortality and awakening are not the same thing. Okay, they are very, very different states. How about siddhi, the manifestation of the maximum potential a human has? They're not discussed so much within the other paths, they just kind of arise as a byproduct perhaps, but they're actually an integrated part of energy work, including Kundalini practice. Yeah. So in modern times, as I see, people have confused these three and thought they are all the same. That awakening, realization, or immortality and enlightenment are the same. They're not. They're very different things. They're very different things with different paths leading towards them. So ultimately, someone is best selecting the path or allowing the path to select them that suits them best. What is the aim that the path is going through? It's not enough to just think you can achieve the same thing. That whole phrase, there's many paths up the mountain, but they all go to the same place, or whatever that phrase is not true. There are many mountains with many different paths. Yeah, that is something that we need to understand. It's not many paths up one mountain. Whoever said that was incorrect. Yeah. Now, generally, probably turns out it was some great rishi or sage or something, so I apologize, but I don't know who said it. But essentially, what tends to happen is, initially when you go into these arts, and this will build into explaining the Kundalini in a second, right, is when people go into these arts, understandably, we don't recognize that they're different. How can you? Because as much as anything, almost everything you see written kind of interchanges the language. And I think also that we tend to always see something from our perspective. So if you're brought up, for example, like I was within a Western culture where Christianity, even though not thrust in my face when I was younger, and it was definitely out the way, I would say England is largely fairly religiously neutral these days, or certainly in the way that I was brought up. But it's still the kind of anchorage point, the reference point that we would understand what spirituality or spiritual development is from a certain perspective. So everything becomes equated according to that idea. And people might deny that, but still I see Christian terminology or Christian ideas used within Western books written on Buddhism and written on Hinduism. They don't know it, but you can see they've equated the ideas with it. And then exactly the same, I've seen people from a Buddhist background using that terminology to explain yogic or Christian practices, and they don't equate. It's not correct, because people will tend to see things through their own lens. You will also get a little bit of a deficiency where everybody thinks what they do is the only way. So Buddhists will tell you the only way to spirituality is release, which is not true. It is the only way to spirituality on their path is through release, through that specific path. But because that is the path they follow, they think that's what everybody needs. They think it's the only way. It's called frog in a well syndrome in China, yeah? Taoists or energy workers will think the only way is to cycle the energy and convert the Jing to the Shen and maybe achieve the Kundalini or work with the energy system. So then they will say that's the only way. But of course it's not the only way. It can also be done through release. The energetic path is ultimately through efficiency and addition and waking up, yes, to stir things. The Buddhist path is through stillness and release, but they are not the same. Yeah. And then of course the religious person will always say the only way is devotion to God. Like that's, as far as they can see, the only path. So if a path doesn't follow that rule, then it's not correct either. Yeah? Understand all that? Yeah? But see, just different paths. And of course there's probably more. Who knows? There's probably more paths, and historically there was more paths. There was historically probably more mountains. There was probably historically more endpoints, more goals. Ultimately, with the nature of reality and the various realms of existence, even if you can say someone's going to heaven in their path, can we be assured it's the same heaven? With so many different frequencies of existence, are they definitely tuning into the same radio station? Who knows? We've got no idea. Wouldn't it be rather dull if all the religious people ended up in the same heaven? They'd just probably start another big war and argument in that one, wouldn't they? So it's probably better we get filtered into different levels of frequency and different states. So, why this is relevant is because ultimately the Kundalini would be considered the path of addition, not subtraction, not letting go, not release. It's not based on any of those things. It's based on addition, adding something, creating something, generating something. It's not based on stillness. Definitely not. It's almost based on a kind of brute force bludgeoning of the energy system, which I'm not against. Don't get me wrong, I'm pro it. I'm pro both paths if you can make them work. I'm definitely not against the chaos of the Kundalini, definitely not. But it's a path that is based upon that, not to achieve liberation from samsara. Doesn't work, won't do that, won't do what that tradition will do. Doesn't lead to a degree of unification with God. It won't do that. It's not a devotional path, it's not based on that. But what it will do, once activated, is take the human being on various levels of existence to the highest level of efficiency that is possible. It takes the mind, the spirit, the soul, the body, the energy, the auric field, so on and so on, to the highest level of efficiency that it possibly can be on whilst upon this earth. Yeah, that's what it will do. It's a kind of ultimate the sort of optimal self-manifestation, I would probably say. But if I want to, I would probably have to break that term down more for you, but it doesn't matter. I think you kind of get it. Yeah. So, is that all right so far? Do you understand this? It does lead to a different place. It's after a different thing, especially if you're talking about the alchemical path. Sometimes we might talk about the Shinjai path, or a path of, there's other forms of Taoism that are more in line with Buddhism, certainly, but Taoism is not really about freedom from samsara in that way, no. No, it leads to a different place. Taoism has absorbed various Buddhist concepts because they're very useful for understanding the mind. Buddhism really mastered analysis of the nature of mind, but it doesn't lead to the same place. No, it doesn't. The Buddhists and the Taoists won't be sitting in the same realm at the end, ultimately. But, I mean, most of these arguments or distinctions are kind of moot. They're kind of useless. I'm only giving you as kind of background stuff, because ultimately, how many of us are going to get to that stage in this life? It's considered a pretty tricky thing to do. So it's kind of like arguing over what happens at kind of Olympic level sports when you're still just starting out in sort of the early stage of playing a game or something. I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's just interesting for me to understand the nature of the past. I wouldn't concern yourself too much about that. Don't worry about it. Oh my God, I'm in the wrong place or anything. Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. Thanks. So, with regards to the Kundalini, the idea is that you have, well, not the idea is, it's a fact, there is contained within the human body the potential for it to realize a state of being that is pretty much no longer human. It is elevated to a state of such efficiency that ultimately the internal path is kind of completed in this lifetime, okay, fairly rapidly if people know how to use these tools within this form. but it's also considered incredibly difficult and something that hardly anybody achieves. Like literally within a generation of people, 1 or 2 on the planet, 3 or 4 on the planet, like that many. The Kundalini is that difficult to complete as a process. Yeah. There are arguments within traditions of Kundalini that can it be done on its own, or does it require assistance or Shaktipad or transmission from ultimately a guru to assist? But you know, I'm not privy to the kind of solution of those arguments, but it's definitely an incredibly difficult thing to do. There are some aspects of the Kundalini that can release. It's like a sliding scale again, and little bits can be released within people, and that's what we need to understand, because those are the things that causes problems, but it's not a complete Kundalini, definitely not. So, the Kundalini, Kunda, I'm sure most of you have some knowledge of this anyway, is a container of water, ultimately, of sort of sacred water. That's what a kunda is. You can kind of equate it almost with the cauldron, the ding of kind of Taoism, but it contains a kind of sacred liquid. It's like a ceremonial thing. And it's also a kind of play on words, because kunda was actually either the name of or a kind of, I can't remember, guardian snake deity, a kind of naga that has existed within certain forms of tantric Hinduism. So this is why we get the idea of the snake energy that is said to be coiled 3 times at the base of the body. 3 is a symbolic number. It's to do with the 3 key gods that represent the 3 key mental qualities from Hinduism that are linked to initiating this energy. And this is said to be coiled at the base of the spine, ultimately gathered in the nerve plexus around the sacrum and the tailbone. Yeah, it's down at the base of the body. So earlier on, maybe yesterday, I said sometimes people release that kind of latent energy that's trapped within the body in places. This would be the most problematic one to accidentally release. This would be the one that's kind of definitely difficult to put back in the box. Once you let out a giant 3 times coiled naga snake and it starts running through your body, I would imagine it's quite difficult to put back in the pot, right? So it would be a problem if people actually release this one a little bit early. It sounds a bit dangerous, doesn't it? And if you see people trying to activate this, you see all kinds of crazy methods. I've seen things, my favorite one being, is it Tibetan or is it Nepalese? I can't remember, it's one or the other, where you see these monks and they jump in the air and then they form lotus position with their legs in the air, which is an amazing feat of flexibility, isn't it? To be able to do that, to jump in the air and just form full lotus and then land on their butt, basically, on their perineum, and they'll do this for hours, jump in the air, lock the legs and land on their butt, just slamming the perineum over and over in an attempt to stir ultimately the Kundalini up through their body. And will it work? No. Definitely not even slightly. At most it's going to destroy your testicles. I'm not sure what else it would do, but it's not going to awaken the Kundalini, because there is a very specific process involved in doing this, in getting it to awaken. And I'll break down a little bit about how it works, a tiny little bit about how the process works. So, is this useful or not? Or do you already know all this? Is this too basic? It's okay. I don't know if you already know. I don't know what level of background people have. Within the body in Hinduism, or within ultimately the energetic side of yoga, I guess, yogic practice, what you have is 5 key types of Qi, 5 key types of energy. There are then further subdivisions beyond that as well, but the 5 key types are really what they concern themselves with regards to something like the Kundalini. And the main one of these would be prana, second one would be apana, but prana would be the first one that they would discuss. Prana is a fairly dense form of energy that's not actually equivalent to Qi. It's not quite the same, but almost. Like you could say they're kind of comparable. They would be slightly different frequencies and slightly different densities. Now ultimately within yogic practice, the idea is to get the prana to enter or to rise, sometimes as udana and sometimes as usana. They have different ways of discussing it, so that it rises through the nadi system, which is not quite equivalent to the channel system again, but almost. It's different radio stations, different frequencies. They're not quite the same. So when you see the nadis mapped out, the channels, they don't match the channel pathways of the Chinese arts. Not quite, almost, like similar, but not quite, yeah? When the prana enters into these channel systems, the idea is to illuminate the body, and in particular, 3 key channels, one of which is called Ida, one called Pingala, and one called Sushumna, that run through the body. Sushumna runs through the center of the body, runs through the core. Then Ida and Pingala are the yin and yang, or solar and lunar channels that entwine either side of Sushumna. Some traditions put them as 3 parallel lines, and some of them have them kind of intertwining around the Sushumna, but it doesn't really matter. Essentially, it's not so important. If you see lots of the kind of early practices within pranayama, such as nadi shodhana, alternate nostril breathing, you've probably seen, or maybe a lot of you have done, where you inhale through one nostril, retain the breath, exhale, inhale, retain the breath, and things like this. These are ultimately designed to balance these key channels, the sort of solar and lunar, or rather the passive and the active aspects of the energetic system. In modern writings, you will see them talking about the passive and active aspects of the nervous system, kind of the sympathetic and parasympathetic, or the rest and active, but it's not quite that, like almost, not quite. But it's more about the degree to which the prana and the apana is stirred within the body. That's what they're trying to do. When they are harmonized, what starts to happen is there's a centralization of energy to the Sushumna, to the central channel, that then starts to light up, and it starts to open up inside the body. This is not the Kundalini. This would be ultimately the kind of, I guess, the later stages of the pranayamic aspect of the yogic tradition. Once those 2 channels, the Ida and Pingala, have kind of harmonized into the Sushumna within the center, then most of the pranayamic work, which is breath work, to link the breath work through controlling it, control and master the breath, most of that work has been completed. At this stage, that energy is then ignited. It is ignited. So what they do is they literally, not far off actually, they set fire internally to the energy within the central channel, which is where the yogic fire comes from. That's what they're trying to do, to ignite, to burn away the impurities within those channels. So already, just from that, can you see it's not based on release? That's not letting go, right? That's not release, not really. That's about harmonizing 2 energies so they go in the center, so that you can pressurize and burn them, ultimately. And you have something called the shamana fire within the center that ignites that process. Now, once that ignites, just so we can understand the mechanics, something starts to appear called the bindu, which, if you've ever been around sort of Hare Krishna groups or anything like that, when they talk about the bindu, they're often talking about a place on the back of the head, aren't they, that they cover with their haircut or something to sort of protect themselves. They consider that the kind of physical manifestation of the bindu. But originally, within kind of esoteric aspects of Hinduism, the bindu was considered the point from which both solar and lunar energies were born. If you know much about sort of Taoist process of creation, you could probably draw parallels there a little bit, can't you, with this idea of what the bindu, the point, was. It would kind of be equivalent to Tai Yi, that singularity that appeared within the space of Wuji, from which masculine and feminine movements started to appear. So the bindu then starts to manifest within the mind's eye of the practitioner, and it will appear as a white sphere. That's what it will appear as, a white sphere. And often you will see on deities in Hinduism that represent this stage of attainment, a white disc, either drawn on their third eye, like a white dot, or sometimes it will be above the head as a crescent moon. Maybe you've seen that above certain Hindu deities or things like this, because it represents the lunar energy when it is touching its core. Think about within alchemy, like when you manage to consolidate Qi or consolidate Shen, then what they do is they start to convert into these lights, the pills, right? And the bindu is a very, very similar process. Not quite the same, but very similar. And then this will start to manifest. Okay, so far? Got this? The workings of Kundalini. I may as well tell you how to activate your Kundalini, but then give you no methods. But I'll give you the process for it. But I'm not a yogi, you know what I mean? So it's not my forte, but I'll just explain the process. What happens when the bindu starts to appear is that the solar, the lunar energies will start to rain down. They will start to drop down through the body. The lunar energies will manifest. The lunar energy is linked to the Ida, or the channel that ends around your left nostril actually. So at that stage, there is an illumination of that channel within the body at the same time. And what rains down is a chemical called the amrita. Yeah, that is equivalent to the jade fluid that we talk about within alchemy, that we talk about within Taoism. There is some parallels we can draw. Some things are different. Qi and prana are not quite the same. Amrita and jade fluid, not Jane's fluid, jade fluid, are the same thing. Yeah, and it rains down through the body. Now, at the beginning, when the solar energy has not yet been achieved, then ultimately what will happen is the lunar energy is said to be burnt up. So what that means is when the amrita drains down through the body, it enters into the fires of the lower part of the region, which is very similar to the fires we talked about earlier on, and it stimulates a huge amount of desire. Yeah, because ultimately what it is a hormonal substance that produced in the head, in the glands of the brain, that rains down through the nervous system, enters into the lower part of the body and generates huge amounts of desire. So what happens at this point is the yogi or the practitioner starts to be tested, enters into a whole process where all of their desires and power and everything start to reach a max. Ultimately, it's like a form of poison fire influence in the heart, right? They sort of hit this kind of troublesome phase. So then we have all kinds of teachings within Hinduism and within yoga, which was said to be the phase when really the guru was required originally. Before the stage of the lunar energy being in place, the guru was not really a part of the path. The teacher was, but not the guru. But at the stage of the lunar energy raining down through the body, the guru was needed. Guru is often translated as the dispeller of darkness, right? But that's not quite correct. Gu and Ru mean dark and light. So ultimately it doesn't mean to dispel the darkness with light, it means to integrate the darkness in the light into one another to create balance. So it meant that as this energy went down through the body, that the practitioner learned how to integrate those parts of their nature that were being stimulated as the lunar energy went down into the solar pits. Understand that? Yeah, as those desires became stirred. If they could do this, then they could sever themselves from these shackles, and then the second of the bindu would appear. And the second bindu was the solar energy, which would appear as a red disc. A red disc. And again, if you look at Indian symbology, what do you often see? A red dot, a red circle. Sometimes the meaning was changed within Indian culture, but it represented the solar bindu, solar, not lunar, solar bindu, the yang bindu, the masculine bindu. Sometimes you'll see a symbol within Hinduism where they'll do a crescent moon kind of this way up, yeah, like a sea facing up, and then a red circle in the middle. Have you seen that? Like a crescent moon with a red dot kind of contained within it. I kind of like that one, and there's certain regions of India, especially sometimes up in the north, around the regions around Uttar Pradesh and stuff like that, where you'll see people actually quite often have that painted on their head. It was very distinctive when I went up there, saw the practitioners with the crescent moon. Very beautiful when they do it well. And sometimes you get some who don't do it well, and it looks like they've just been drunk and they've dipped their finger in some paint or something. But if it's done well, it looks very nice. So this symbol represents that now the lunar energy is capturing the solar energy. Yeah, it's like it's dropping into here. So at this stage, the two bindu will combine, and what it generates is a final fire that, you'll have to excuse me, the name has escaped me. Sorry. The name has escaped me. Maybe not sure. But there's a kind of fire that's generated by the bindu when they start to touch each other. You could kind of equate it a little bit with the higher levels of fire and water merging in alchemy, but maybe not, like maybe slightly equivalent, but a slightly different frequency, who knows. But that generates the fire that is then sent downwards into the kunda to stir the snake, to stir the serpent energy. So that's how the Kundalini is awakened. Yeah, that's the process that has to be gone through. It's quite involved, right? I think there's quite a lot in it to get this energy to activate. And the reason I want to explain that to you is because I want to show you how unlikely it is for someone to accidentally awaken the Kundalini. Okay, it's unlikely. It's unlikely to stumble upon that. But what's more likely is people will activate something similar feeling to the Kundalini that we'll discuss in a minute. We may as well finish the Kundalini. So then what happens is the Kundalini will move up through the body. As it goes up through the body, it moves through the Sushumna and through the nervous system of the spine up into the brain, lights them up and takes the nervous system, the Nadi system and the brain to its kind of highest possible level. Okay, so it kind of takes you to the biggest potential they can possibly have. At this stage, what happens is there's said to be a lightning strike from above, and then another energy descends from the upper body back down to the bottom of the body. So the final Kundalini strike is down, and it's like a strike of lightning that moves through the body. This is symbolized by Shakti, which is the kind of spiritualized version of prana, and Shiva, the energy from above, merging. So they say Shiva and Shakti have come together, which is obviously symbolized by the two gods copulating that you often see in statues. Yeah. When that energy goes down through, it awakens the chakra system. That is the earliest point you can open and awaken the chakras. Like, they won't open before that. They will not activate before that. It will not happen. So the chakras then will open at that stage from the lightning strike that enters down through the body, and then the body realizes its maximum potential, and then you ultimately become whatever you want to say, the highest level that a human being can be, almost like a demigod on earth, if we're to believe the stories of the things that unlock from somebody that has achieved that rare stage. Yeah, I've met one person who's done it out of all of these years of people that I've met that has fully done the process. One. Yeah, and I've met many who said they had, but only one that's done it, and it's not me, so don't get excited. Nowhere near, but I've met one person who's done it. Yeah. So that's Kundalini. Do you think you understand it? Intellectually, the process involved, right? The process involved. It's fairly involved, but I think it has some similarities with alchemy, doesn't it? If you understand sort of the whole alchemy path, there's definitely some crossovers, isn't there? You can see there's kind of shared ideas, or probably the alchemists learnt from the knowledge of the Indians, I would imagine. I would imagine the Indians had it first. So there's definitely, you can see they're kind of sort of trying to discuss that process and understand it. So what are people actually getting when they say that they're having a Kundalini awakening is not really the Kundalini awakening, because the other thing that comes with the Kundalini awakening is supposedly the greatest amount of pain a human being could ever experience in the mortal realm. That's one of the other descriptive terms that comes with the Kundalini. I can't remember how they describe it, but it's something along the lines of a burning of every aspect of their being. All 72,000 nadis have to ignite and burn. And if you imagine every part of your nervous system on fire, it doesn't sound particularly nice. So if we are to believe the description from the kind of originators or founders of the kind of teachings around this, it's not a pleasant process. Yeah, it's not something that's particularly comfortable. You are reconfiguring the nature of who you are as a human. Just drink this a minute. Any questions before I move on? No. Oh. That's really good. You discuss something really complicated than that. No questions. Perfect. So, there's various tools used to achieve all of this. Some of which are given by the master, by the teacher, by the guru at a certain stage, but some of them are specific mental exercises and physical exercises and so on that must be done. But before that, people can release... No. Well, because a normal life requires that you connect with life on a normal level through your sense faculties. So, no, I would say not. Depending on your definition of normal, I suppose. But you're not gonna hold down a 9 to 5, I wouldn't imagine. Popping along to Tesco's to work the tills or something's going to be difficult after the Kundalini, I would imagine. Or maybe really easy. We could do it psychically. Yeah. So, what can be released before that? If you think about what the Kundalini is, it's a mixture of the energy that's dormant within the nerves that exist around the region of the sacrum, within the Kunda down there, isn't it? It's formed of that. But it's also formed of the solar and the lunar energies of the two Bindu that are put into that pot as well, Doesn't this reminiscent of alchemy? 3 ingredients need putting into the pot to generate something. There's always ingredients, right? What ingredients aren't people going to have? They're not going to have the bindu. They're not going to have either of these. They're not going to have the amrita fluid generally. They're not going to have that kind of the fire that's generated from the solar energy at its highest level. And they're not going to have the sort of catalyst that goes into there to generate that awakening. But what they can do is they can release one of the raw ingredients for the Kundalini, which ultimately would be a large degree of prana, I suppose, that is stored around that part of the sacrum that goes up through the back. And when it goes up through the back, what it's going to do is it's just going to release a lot of energy into the nerves, into the nervous system. But it's not the Kundalini. So as it arises up through the spine, gets let go from that area, from the pot of the sacrum, it's going to put someone into extreme fight or flight. That's the first thing. And then as it moves up towards the brain, it can lead to all kinds of psychic / delusional kind of phenomena that are released from inside that person. Okay, sometimes they can be real, sometimes not, but it's very hard to know the difference between the two. At a higher level, when that energy moves through, sometimes the equivalent of Shakti can be released, which is a slightly more ethereal or spiritual energy that moves through the nervous system. As it goes up through into the brain, what it's going to do is leave the feeling of a sense of an electrical current that runs through the spine up into the head, and that can start to unlock various dormant centers within the brain. So it is possible that somebody that's had that experience can start to develop sort of heightened sensitivity, perhaps unusual vision, the ability to see and feel and hear thoughts and things like this. But you also have to remember that anybody that's had a lot of energy go into the nervous system on a more basic level than that, more basic than that Shakti going into the brain, you know, even if you come down, if you heighten the nervous system to a very high level, what it becomes is like a very finely tuned antennae, right? It's like a big antennae system over your body, if you want, that picks up electrical energy off other people, meaning that your nervous system will start to mirror theirs to a very, very high level. So ultimately what you get is a kind of heightened sensitivity to what they're feeling. Now, all humans have that to varying degrees. I think especially people that work with others, such as therapists. But of course, somebody that's had that kind of extra energy that's moving through the body is going to get that to a much higher level. You can see how that would happen, right? Like a finely tuned antennae that's just kind of picking up. So consequently, when that happens, they make good therapists, definitely, because all of a sudden you can read all this information off other people. You're literally reading it straight off of their nerves into your nerves. That's amazing. You're kind of mirroring what they're doing. But on the downside, you're also going to pick up the negativities within that person as well. So of course, what's the big complaint that people have? Not a complaint. It is a problem. Complaint sort of belittles it. It is a big problem. That when they start to have those kind of experiences, is they find that they can't go around the public very easily. That crowds become difficult, especially crowds that are very agitated can be a little bit difficult to be around. And even when they're therapeutically treating someone, they'll find that they just kind of pick up the negative emotion or the negative physical symptom off of them. So they start to accumulate other people's crap ultimately within the body, which some people giving thumbs up. Does that describe you? Does it? A few people done that. Yeah, it's a problem, right? It's a problem, and so over time accumulated. What does that mean? It means that ultimately, after a while, the nervous system gets a bit fried, doesn't it? It's like it can only take so much, and then what you get is that kind of build up, and then that kind of almost burnout can start to come. So people that have that often have to, you know, I don't want to talk about any of you here, I don't know your situations, but certainly from the people I know that I've met, they often ended up leaving kind of almost compartmentalized lives a little bit, the ones I know, where they go out and they treat people and they see people, but then they need to retreat on their own and they have to stay away from people a little bit just to kind of let go and let everything settle and let the nervous system kind of let go before they go out and see people again, which ultimately becomes a little bit inconvenient sometimes to kind of live in that way. But that's what it is. It's heightened energy moving into the nervous system to stimulate it too much. If it has caused something to open in the head that's releasing kind of psychic centers at a kind of high level, that would be more like a Shakti release that's moving up through the nervous system, but still not the Kundalini. And if it is just caused them to feel very anxious and very highly strung and quite a lot of discomfort, that would be a release of, I guess in Hindu terms, prana, that is released from the base of the body. Yeah, that is released into here. So it might sound like I'm splitting hairs, because of course people will say Kundalini sickness, but actually for me I want to differentiate between what has happened, what is the different thing that has been released, what is the different quality that's moved into the nerves. Now, of course, the other thing people will discuss under that heading of Kundalini sickness is they'll say that the spine started moving around of its own accord, like a snake whipping or something like that. But of course, that's Zerfagong, right? That's Zerfagong. So ultimately what that is an excess of yang qi moving into the spine. That's what it is. So it's generating that spontaneous movement. So it's not Kundalini. It's ultimately the nervous system trying to regulate itself and trying to create more space within the body, a common phenomena within lots of different traditions. In some forms of yoga, they would consider it a kind of kriya, an action, but an internal cleansing action that is released from inside the body. So a kind of part of the pranayamic aspect of the tradition. Yeah. Do you understand all that? Yeah, cool. Okay, yeah, sure. When I say prana is different from qi, I mean the kind of standard qi we talk about in Qigong. So I'm talking about yin and yang qi, because also qi is a nightmare of a term, isn't it? Because when we say qi, we can refer to the yin yang qi or the nei qi of Neigong, but we can also refer to the mechanisms of energy metabolism that take place within the body that we discuss in Chinese medicine ultimately as well, which is another level of qi, isn't it, when we're talking about sort of zong qi and things like that. So there's different ways that we discuss it. And prana would be at a slightly denser level than the qi of yin and yang qi. Slightly less, I apologize, slightly less dense than yin and yang qi, a little bit more ethereal than the stuff of Neigong. Prana, apana and shamana are more in line with ultimately the elemental qi that we talk about in alchemy, more in line with that. Oh, yeah, I'm sure, yeah. A big break from everybody. Yeah, I feel for, I do feel for people that have that kind of highly tuned nervous system that picks stuff up, because there's been phases in my practice when I've had that because I've just been moving a lot through the body and it's become very, very heightened. But I've been lucky, blessed, whatever, to have moved in and out of and not been sort of held in that stage, because I know some people like it, but I found it very uncomfortable. I don't want to know what's going on for people, to be perfectly honest. I'm happy to leave them be. But I think maybe you guys are tougher, but I would be too emotionally sensitive to be stuck in that stage, because it would actually stress me to feel what everybody's feeling. I'm happy to be dense. So I do feel for people that have that kind of highly tuned nervous system. It doesn't sound very pleasant. Well, Kriya as a term literally means action, really. So it's used in various ways. So that's why I was saying the three paths of Kriya within, not that I should be teaching yoga really, but you know what I mean, the three paths of Kriya ultimately are discussing three different ways of working. But then the term Kriya is used within other traditions, especially within tantric or energetic based traditions, to mean a kind of action that the body can produce. And sometimes Kriya is used in a sense of a cleansing action as well. So everything from certain types of breath work through to even something like the neti pot, where you pour the old water up, salty water up one nostril and out the other, could be considered a kind of Kriya within certain traditions. So it's one of those words that's used different ways. Yeah, so that's true. I mean, what ultimately happens is, if the dantian can be built, okay, to a fairly sturdy level, then what will happen is, what it will start to do is draw some of the energy out of the nerves, not to empty it out, but just kind of anchor and root it through to this space, because now you have a magnet that's stronger than the energy that's in the nerves, to use a very simple model, I guess. Not quite how it works, but almost. So it pulls the energy through to here. So what will happen is it will lessen the pressure off of the nervous system. But ultimately, for example, if I'm treating someone, what I can do is just release a point on the middle of the dantian, and my body opens up and the qi moves into the nerves, and then I have that heightened sensitivity that some people are stuck with. So I can now have it, and at this stage, I can pick up a lot of information off the other person and read their body, read their mind, read their emotions, or whatever. Not their mind as in, their bank card and stuff, you know what I mean? I can pick up certain qualities, whatever they are transferring into the nervous system can transfer into mine, so I can mirror and take that information. But once I've had enough, I just drop and sink and song and let the Qi return back to the Dantian, and then I'm out of that state. And ultimately that for me is what I want, because it means that I can walk around and ignore the world and be oblivious to what's going on. No mindfulness, no awareness, stumbling my way through life in a clumsy fashion, but then when I wish to, I can open up to it. So if you are someone who struggles with that, I can highly recommend the Dantian building for that reason, just so you have that on-off switch. Unless you want to be on all the time, in which case, cool, go for it. Oh, well, it's comparative, so it depends how much is in the nervous system already, to be perfectly honest, because it's like anything, it's got to be higher. So it's a crappy model, I know, but if your nervous system is this highly strung, the Dantian's got to be here. But if your nervous system is only this highly strung, Dantian's have got to be here. So it's a comparative thing. Ultimately, the magnet in the bottom has to be stronger. But I don't think it's that long. It's not. We're not talking a decade. You know, I think we're talking a couple of years for most people, I think, which I don't think is very long in the grand scheme of life, is it? So that was kind of the fastest rundown of Kundalini ever, wasn't it? 45 minutes? How it works, maybe? So, the next thing we need to discuss with regards to yogic errors, because as it is on this course, I'm just trying to discuss the different things that people can have that go wrong. And if you are involved in the internal arts, you're going to encounter people that have problems from yogic practice as well, of course, aren't you? You're going to have people who have problems from meditation, people who have problems from Qigong, people who have problems from yoga. Those are going to be the three main sources. So the accidental release of energy, that's one of them. Oh yeah, who's going to get that? That's going to be people that have done, it's going to be pranayamic work more than asana work. So you know the difference between the two, right? Asana would be bodily based work, postures based upon stability, okay? And then the stretching that you usually see, the hot pants stuff, right? And then the pranayama would be the breath work, okay? That is normally a little bit more, not normally, but not always, a bit more assertive than Taoist breath work, okay, the pranayama. Pranayamic practitioners are more likely to get problems than asana practitioners. Asana practitioners, if they do anything wrong, normally going to injure the physical body, aren't they, more than anything else? They overstretch, or they make a posture incorrectly, or the teacher stretches them in the wrong way, or whatever. But pranayamic people are more likely to accidentally release some of that energy, but still less, not that likely, like it's still quite unusual. Then the next level of practitioner that's going to release that is probably going to be, well, okay, I use a generic term, meditation, sort of Hindu or yogic based meditation, because they tend to focus higher in their practice than we do within Chinese arts. So not always. Some yogic traditions focus low, some yogic traditions focus on the solar plexus, some yogic traditions focus on the breath, and various other things, of course. Some yogic traditions focus on Shiva and things like this, but there's a lot of yoga that focuses very high from the beginning, also kind of rolling the eyeballs back in the head and stuff like this. And sometimes those kind of practices in some people seem to generate enough of a force here that it starts to pull that energy from underneath and releases it a little bit early. So sometimes I've had people with those kind of practices have had that problem, that energy that just kind of releases from here. Sometimes people have done it from mantra. I've known people that have done it through mantra, which confuses me because I know the whole world loves mantra, but I think that mantra are not that useful. I think they're kind of useless. Everybody in the world who does the internal arts loves mantra, apart from me. Everybody's always asking, can we learn some mantras? I'm like, oh, here we go. But there you go. I just simply believe in Om and one or two others, I think. But there you go. I know some people that have released it through mantra, but maybe they have a more devotional soul than I do. There's no devotion in me, unfortunately. I wish there was, but I can't find it. So I've known some people that have managed to release it that way too. And then some people just random, like what happened? Obviously there was some kind of causative thing, but we don't know what it is. Maybe it was an emotional thing or a trauma or an experience or who knows, I don't know. People have just kind of released it and let it go. But the most common place that I've seen it is people from pranayamic work, kind of forced breathing. That seems to be the most likely place that it releases. The next error that we have from yoga, which I'll do very briefly, see how fast I spoke through that, try to get the Kundalini done. The next problem that you get from yoga, if it goes wrong, is that people will accidentally stimulate the fire that sits here at the center of the body, linked to ultimately the digestive fires in Ayurvedic thought. But we could equate it perhaps with the kind of earth center energy that sits in this place in Qigong. I talked a little bit about this on the last course with you when we were doing breath work, if you were on that, the kind of foundations. So I'll just do it very briefly here, is that if we use yogic terminology, we'll stick to that. On the base of the body, you have the prana that sits around this region. Okay, the prana sits around here, a kind of denser energy. And then the apana sits up here around the chest cavity. Now, curiously, some yogic traditions disagree and place prana and apana the other way round. It's another one of those kind of debates I've seen within yogic tradition, which sits where. But to me, it's kind of irrelevant, because ultimately the first tradition that says prana is down here is talking about where the root of prana is, and the second tradition that says prana is up here is talking about where that energy goes, because the prana tends to want to rise up towards this region. The apana originates around here and then descends down towards this region. So again, it really depends on whether the traditions are talking about where the energy comes from or where it goes. Now, ultimately, where they meet in the center is said to be the root for the shamana fire that builds around the middle of the body, that we can equate with the digestive fires. This fire spreads through the body naturally to just stimulate the nadis from the center of your body. That's a kind of basis. It's a bit of a sort of bastardized, cut down version. I apologize to yogic practitioners, I've stripped it down, but that's kind of the basis of these three energies. You then have two others as well, Udana and Shamana, but they put those elsewhere. But these three energies sit here. Now, when people are doing a breath such as Kapalabhati, okay, this kind of breathing that you've probably seen or done if you've been to a yoga class, then ultimately what happens is when that breathing is here and that pumping is taking place of the bellows, what it's supposed to do is encourage, depending on what they call it, the prana or the apana, to move from the lower center upwards. And what will happen is it will start a cycle within the center of the body. Now, is this too fast? Am I speaking too quickly? Or are you okay? You're right. Okay, that's good. That's okay then. Now, often if you look at Kapalabhati, this type of breathing, or similar things such as Tumo, which is kind of an advanced version of this, they will talk about it with regards to nerves and endocrine system and intestinal clearing and all that stuff that I don't have any idea about. I don't understand any of that kind of stuff. I don't know. I purely exist within the kind of esoteric side of the tradition. But originally what they were discussing was trying to get these two energies to combine and to mix so that they could create a particular result. Part of this result was to cleanse and to purge, because once they mixed, they could move through the body. But then the other effect was ultimately to start the process of moving towards increasing the efficiency of the body to open up the nadi system. Now, the error comes is that if people don't have separation of the muscles in the abdominal region, particularly this section from the sort of navel down, and then from the navel to the, what would you call that? It needs to be separated from the navel to, if I take the xiphoid process, bottom of the sternum, and then halfway between the navel and that point, so it's not the solar plexus, it's lower. It's kind of the top, I guess, of the abdominal muscles here. These three sections need to be separate. So from umbilicus down, umbilicus to this point, and then this point to the sternum need to be functioning separately. So what you see with yogic practitioners is, what do? They manipulate their abdominal muscles. Have you seen them rolling them side to side? Or maybe some of you do that. Rolling them across and working the muscles. And of course, through the various asanas and locks, what they're doing is they're twisting and adjusting those muscles to separate them. So these three sections need to function separately, so that when I pump the lower part through something like Kapalabhati, this common breathing, it doesn't stimulate the other regions. It doesn't stimulate the other regions. But of course, what happens is, if people haven't done a correct level of separation within these parts of the body, when they do Kapalabhati with the lower and they pump the lower part of the abdomen, they will also stimulate the other regions. Now here, around the solar plexus to the xiphoid process, is that the correct term for it? I'm not sure. The sharp bone on the bottom of your sternum. Sorry about that. The bone here anyway. So if they accidentally stimulate both, then every time they breathe, instead of sending the prana up, what they do is they stimulate the fire that sits at the center of the body, the digestive fires that are moving into the nerves. So that fire will raise through the body instead of the prana. And you can see why that would be a problem, right? You're stoking extra heat that you send through the system. Now, curiously, unlike the fire of Qigong, it's a different density. Different density. Okay so far? Not too confusing? It's okay? Yeah, okay. So I kind of understand this as much as anything, partly because I have a little bit more of a background in yogic practice than I let on with regards over the years of what I've studied, but I tend to try to stay away from it to keep my traditions clean so that I don't get questions on that. But also from working with people who've had these problems, and I can see where the mechanisms come from. So after many years of doing this kind of work with acupuncture and Qigong, and very lucky to meet lots of people because I get so many people coming in and out of events with courses. I like to meet everybody and chat with them and see what problems they've had. So I can see the patterns that are forming in the people that have had these issues. I guess I don't really have any particular innate talent for these arts. That's not something I have. I just work like a demon. That's how I learn to do them. I don't have any talent for that. But if I do have any talent, I do have the ability to break stuff down quite mechanically and understand the workings of something. I can kind of say, all right, that's how this works. I can kind of tinker around in there. So with regards to understanding these problems, it's that part of my mind that I've applied to it to see what's going on. So the fire that we raise up through Chinese medicine, or we shouldn't raise up, you know what I mean, that accidentally rises in Chinese medicine or accidentally rises in Qigong, that we equate with sort of yang rising or liver fire or internal heat, these kind of things. It's that kind of subtle energy that I was trying to get you to connect with yesterday. You know, when we're playing with the hands, just trying to feel it through the Sun Yuan exercise, trying to feel that kind of energy. So where does it go? It goes to the head, goes to the face, goes to the sort of eyes, makes you sweat, gives you a headache, palpitations as it passes through the heart. It kind of hits your body on that level, kind of through the viscera, through the organs, right? Now, the energy that is released here from the body when you do those kind of forceful breathing methods without the disconnection is a little different, because where does it go? Always seems to go to the thyroid. That seems to be where it goes. It hits the thyroid and causes someone to become, I always get these two mixed up, hyperthyroidism. I always get the word wrong, you know what I mean? When the eyes start to get big and they start to bulge and everything becomes a little bit, that's right, isn't it? Hyper, isn't it? Excuse me, Western medicine is not my strongest point. But it starts to make everything become too active. So if you look up the symptoms that come with that kind of condition, that's what you tend to get from yogic practice that's accidentally initiated that fire from here. Alongside that, it tends to get the migraines and things as well, and mood outbursts as well. Okay, tend to be quite extreme. Okay, can be quite volatile when that energy rises within the body. Why there rather than the rest of the head? I don't know, other than it's just a slightly different density. I guess it's a different form of energy that's moving through the body, but I don't really understand why it tends to hit there. But that's what you tend to see happen with regards to that. So with regards to that one, the fire, you can use, if that has happened, you can use the heat removing sort of exercises I showed you last time, breathing out through the mouth with the linking of the little fingers. But also there is a more subtle version that's actually derived from yoga. So actually I'm going to break my usual rule and show you a sort of simple yogic exercise that releases the heat a little bit, which is just simply a slightly different way of using the hands. And this mudra actually connects with that density of heat, so it's quite good for repairing the damage that's been done from that kind of releasing of the fire from inside. I can't show you something to cure the kind of release of that energy. I can't show you something to stop the Kundalini, and I can't really show you anything to deal with that energy that rises from the sacrum through the nerves, other than the breathing exercise we did on the first day, where you hold your breath. The first one I did, where you retain the breath and to release the diaphragm and the nerves, will reset the nervous system. and we combine that with the building of the lower dantian, so the magnet draws that energy out from above, and then that will fix the condition if you've had that Shakti release or that energy release through the nervous system. But it just takes some time. You'll have to work on that a little bit. So it's kind of Neigong to build the dantian, plus the release of that breathing method. Yeah, that was what you would work on. But I can also show you a slightly different heat exercise, more specifically for the error that comes from the forceful yogic breathing that's hit the thyroid and that part of the body as well. Yeah, so that's what we'll look at in a second. Okay, any questions before we do that? Is that subtle Qi yesterday, the subtle Qi that you mentioned, we need to access with the right strength of the yin yang? That's a good question. Yeah, I suppose it's on the same level. I guess the only difference is that the stuff I was looking at yesterday is pathogenic aspect of it, like a pathological version of it. But it's actually, yes, it would be a similar, it would be a similar density if you connect with the yin yang, yes. Please explain the difference between subtle energy and other Qi. Yeah, sorry, I'm not using the terms very clear. I apologize. I'm not being very clear cut on my terminology from the last two questions. Definitely not. But essentially all I'm referring to, I guess subtle energy is not a thing as such to me, and Qi is not a thing. I'm just using the terms kind of comparatively, because what I mean is there's certain forms of Qi, certain forms of energy that are easier to grab a hold of. For example, the magnetic or the electrical energy is a little bit easier to grasp at first. So when I say subtle forms of Qi, what I mean is stuff that is a little bit harder to grasp, a little bit harder to contact. So then there are increasingly subtle levels of Qi that are harder to grasp. They require a certain more subtlety with your awareness and a little bit more subtlety with your technique in order to grasp. And so I hope that makes sense, that I'm not saying that subtle energy is a specific thing. I'm just saying it's sort of gradations of it. Did I explain that okay? Did that make sense? I hope so. Yeah, sorry, that's my fault. I'm not using the terms very clearly. Back on the not Kundalini energy releases. Is developing the best solution for the overwhelmed nervous system? Oh, I see. It's developing the dantian. He's added that there. The best system for the overwhelmed nervous system. Yeah, that's why I was saying a second ago that it's the combination of the two. First of all, you need to defrag. Is that the word? I like that word. You need to defrag the nervous system. It needs to be let go. So that diaphragm needs to release. Don't underestimate the connection of the diaphragm to the nervous system. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. It's bigger than people think. Probably even bigger than the breathing itself. Like, to me, it's actually the diaphragm that's kind of a mechanism there. The release of that diaphragm to defrag the nervous system and just let everything extend and opened up will start to alleviate the pressure. It ultimately as well releases the resistance in the nerves, meaning that there's less grip, less heat in the nervous system in the first place, which will gradually let it relax. And then on top of that, then you build the dantian. You build that magnet down the base of the body to draw it all down. Because remember, energy is going to be led to wherever there is something to guide it. Yeah. So when you're thinking, it's going to go to your thoughts. When you're emotional, it's going to your emotions. But when you're going down and you're going to sleep, you're not thinking of anything. That's when people get problems, because now you're in passive or neutral mode. It's going to go to wherever is a default. So if your biggest magnet is the heart, you're going to get emotional. If your biggest magnet is your brain, you're going to start thinking too much. If you've overtuned the nervous system, it's just going to move into that, and you're going to get filled with all kinds of sensations. You're going to be laying there in bed, feeling everything everyone you met throughout the day felt, just kind of running through your body, because the energy within your system doesn't have another magnet to draw it away, to draw it towards. So what we want is the dantian to kind of be a magnet to pull it down towards that place. And the combination of less resistance and a bigger magnet will pull it down to make you hunky-dory and comfortable, and the life will be peachy once again. If you are an acupuncturist, maybe not a herbalist, yeah, I think you would need acupuncture to do it, then understanding the divergent channels can help somebody with this as well. If you understand how to use them and the sequencing of the divergent channels, that will also assist you as well, if you can understand the process, because the divergent channels will actually enable you to process some of that stuff that is stuck within the nervous system, especially the stuff that somebody is re-experiencing at night. So if you're an acupuncturist, you might want to explore that. Remember, divergent channels and nighttime are very closely linked, right? They're kind of intertwined. The divergents aren't really very active during the day. And if you are someone who's seeking therapeutic help, you might want to, I guess quite a lot of acupuncturists do understand the divergent channels, but some don't. So it's probably going to be somebody with that kind of knowledge that you want to look for if you need help with that, which isn't me. I'm off duty during the COVID era. So let's do some practice, because I have talked enough. I've talked too much. I'm sure your souls are bored, your brain is dribbling out your ears. You're just thinking, shut up, Damo, let's do something. So, let's do that. That's what I'm thinking anyway. So, like I say, moving, we'll start with the ceiling, and I'm going to break my usual rules and then move into a practice from a different tradition. But it's only because it's very simple and medical to help somebody to clear that heat that's rising from this area, that's incorrectly rising from the central place. Just another tool that you have in case there's an error that you've had from that kind of practice or somebody that you know that might need help. So we're going to sit spine upright, as always. Again, you might want to sit more neatly than me. As the years have gone on, my arms have become more slob-like. I just kind of drape them over my arms, but I used to be a lot over my legs, but I used to be a lot neater. Whatever you want to do, rest them in your lap or rest them on the knees. Don't be a slob like me. And then just let your body breathe in and out through the nose, and just for 5 minutes, we're just going to settle into the practice. Okay, and start the reverse breathing. So breathing in, close that abdominal cavity. Breathe out, just let it relax. And be gentle, not forceful at all. Especially as the way we were supposed to be using this exercise is a kind of therapeutic, repairing a deviation kind of exercise, right? So everything wants to be on the slightly gentle side of the spectrum, yeah? So I just gently, subtly close that abdominal cavity. And then just relax it on the out breath. So that sphere closes gently and then just relaxes open. Then take the mind to the surface of the skin, as we did before. Just let it rest on the form of the body, the shape of the body, on the surface. Because generally for repairing work, we want to seal any leakages first. Okay, so then we're going to breathe in and draw the skin in, the shrink wrapping, vacuum packing. So as I close the dantian, I just want to tune into that feeling of everything just, I don't want to say squeezing, that's a little bit too strong, but you know what I mean, like a slight packing feeling around the skin. And then as I breathe out, I just let it relax. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to come forward a little bit so you can see actually. You guys stay sat. I'm going to try and, hopefully this is big enough on the camera. It's been a while since I did this. Okay, so you're going to take your left thumb, place it in your right hand. Okay, like so. So it's my left thumb, place it in my right palm. Okay. I'm going to close the fingers around my left thumb. And this is not gender specific. Sometimes you'll say it is, see people say it is, but it's not. Yeah. And then I'm going to seal my fingers over my left fist. Yeah. So if I do that again, I touch my left thumb into my right palm, then I close the fist. Then I take the fingers of my left hand and I rest them like this across the top of my right hand. Okay. So again, palm, left thumb, right palm. Close, press fingers on top, like that, yeah? I think that's okay, yeah? Then take your thumb and press it with a little bit of pressure against the middle finger, pads of the middle finger, yeah? And these fingers are not spread, they are together. So this thumb is pressing on the tip of the pad of the middle finger, okay? So I'll form it one more time. Left thumb in right palm. Close it around my thumb. Put these fingers straight on top of the knuckles and then touch your thumb to the middle finger to create this shape. Here, yeah? Hopefully that's okay. I'll do it one more time. There's always someone who wants it once more. Left thumb, right palm. Close around your thumb. Touch the fingers like this, as if you're sealing on top of your hand, and then take the right thumb, the spare thumb, and press it against the middle finger of your left hand. That creates this shape. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that position and raise it here in front of the throat. So I have this triangular shape here. Stick with it on this side. Use this side unless it feels particularly uncomfortable, in which case switch it, as per usual for mudra. But don't worry about genders. Okay, just go with what's comfortable. So, place it here in front of the throat. I try not to bend the wrists too much. Kind of want them neat and straight. And then I don't seal the armpits. I open them up a tiny little bit, so not squeeze. Just here. Now I want you to try this. It's a little bit maybe more subtle than some of the other stuff. But again, we're trying to touch that type of heat that it can be released as an accident to move towards the thyroid. Okay, so it's a thyroid harmonizing posture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to breathe normally. Keep it simple, just with your eyes closed. And we'll just give you a second or a couple of minutes just to breathe, holding the shape. Now for the moment, just focus upon the shape of the hands. Just for a moment, just put your mind into the palms. Just for a second, into the hand, into the mudra, yeah? Just have your awareness there just for a second. Keep your eyes closed, stay with it. Okay, good. Now just breathe in and out through the nose naturally. And just let your mind fill the whole body, whole form, hand shape as well. Just like you're listening to everything, all of you, the whole body at the same time. for 5 minutes. Good, then bring the hands down, palms up. Just breathe. Just a few deep breaths in and out through the nose. Move the body around a little. For therapeutic work, fixing work, these short sessions of 20 to 30 minutes, fine. No need to do an hour, 2 hours, anything like that. And we may as well just seal the kidneys. Won't do any harm. Eyes. Just twist the spine. Turn the head. Here to shoulder. Stretch the neck. Okay, so let me change the camera. So that one always leaves me a bit spacey, to be honest. But that one is a little bit more subtle than the other one because it's specifically designed for that particular frequency, density, don't know what the word it is, that rises up from that error generally. So it is targeted for that particular type of energy. Whenever you're doing these kind of things, if they're done therapeutically, it's a little different than if you're doing a practice where we kind of get into it and spend some time. Kind of like when we did the Qigong yesterday, you know, it was like an hour and a half working through it or 2 hours. But something like this, if someone has a problem, just 20 to 30 minutes sat is enough. And then if they want to do more, then they're best off having a 5-minute break and then going back into it or something realistically with regards to these kind of practices. Remember, with anything that's therapeutic, the person has a problem, right? They have an issue. So we don't want to just bludgeon that issue in order to fix it with hours and hours of work. It wants to be short bursts like this in order to assist them because you're trying to actually get them to work through that issue. So that practice there, it doesn't matter, you don't need too many details around it, but ultimately what it will do as much as anything is it will rebalance anything that stagnates around that area where the thyroid sits and around the throat and around the upper chest as well. A lot of people will find it also opens up the nasal passages quite strongly as well, like almost like it pushes the nostrils open after they've done it a few times, but maybe not the first time, but it will take a little bit of time in order for that to happen. But it's different because it won't work on the kind of qi that rises through something like Qigong, right? So it's not going to work on the kind of heat that you would associate with Chinese medicine that's rising, through that kind of heat that generates the headaches and the flushed face and everything. It's more that kind of heat or that issue that hits the thyroid, hits that level. They're quite different things. Yeah. So the practices need to be switched accordingly. And of course, if you don't know which kind of heat it is, you can just do both. You can do both because one of the two exercises will hit it. There's nothing wrong with that. Do them in separate sessions, of course, but you can try it. There's nothing wrong with it. So let me just check here. Trick says, didn't feel subtle to me. It brought out a lot of warmth on the back, chest and arms. The heat dispersed when I opened the mudras and put the hands back down. Okay, well, that sounds like the practice that you should be doing then. If that's the one that touches on that heat, that develops it and releases it, then off you go. Add that into your repertoire. It's even better if you get to the stage where it builds a little bit of a red flush, like an actual rash come up on the skin, like a red rash. Normally it comes up here on the sort of sternum bone where the skin is thin if it's releasing. So if you check in a mirror after doing it, see if that comes up. But yeah, that's good. Hi Damo, what does the rubbing of the kidneys do at the end of the seated session? It just kind of brings everything back down to there. It stimulates the kidneys and strengthens it, because the kidneys have the job of anchoring and descending the qi from the chest down to that area. But realistically, that's not going to be as effective as it could be, because I mean, kind of the baseline for Qigong practitioners in the olden days was essentially to be able to generate the sacred fluid on the surface of the skin, which was rubbed into the kidneys when they did that, so it actually regenerated them. But obviously we're not really focused on that. So for now we use it just to kind of stimulate the qi from the chest downwards. Is that exercise okay for people who have hypothyroidism as well? Also, yes. Yeah, it is. It's a general tonification and balancing one for the thyroid. The only reason I talked about hyper is because that's the kind of thing that tends to arise from that yogic error as much as anything, but it will balance the energy in that area. I thought about you actually, saw you doing it up there when you were doing it. Yeah, it can be useful either way, yeah. But obviously it's going to be easier for someone that is more connected to internal work anyway, someone that's already kind of in that scene. It's going to be difficult to take your local person who's never done anything and show them. It's going to be hard, you know. There's certain prerequisite skills of working with your qi and working with your breath and working with the inside and the posture and the mind that are needed to get it to work. But yeah, it'll work with the thyroid generally. But it wouldn't be any good prescribing it on the NHS. You know what I mean? There needs to be a certain degree of kind of internal connection to get it to go. Deborah, you refer to two practices. What's the second? What two practices was I talking about then? Two practices. Oh, you mean two different types of heat? Two different types of heat, perhaps. I was referring to the other one where you breathe out through the mouth, the one I was doing in the last session. Yeah, so you breathe out through the mouth with the little fingers interlocked, which ultimately extends the channel, which vents heat out from under the armpit, the heart channel. So that one is, that exercise I was talking about is more for the heat that rises. I think those are the two I was discussing. So, with regards to exercises, what have we looked at? We did yesterday, oh God, I got to remember now, haven't I? In the first session we did a bit of an introduction and we looked at ultimately yin and yang breathing, one that releases tension and takes people out of fight or flight, which was the first one I did deliberately. You know, that's kind of major because, as I said, a lot of people that think they have a problem that's arisen energetically is actually often just because they need to get out of that fight or flight mode. I think as is the case for a lot of problems in general, isn't it? Like once you get out of fight or flight, I think that helps a lot of things. So there was that practice, and then I also did one that is a little bit more energizing for the nerves, just engages them a little bit for those people that are a bit lethargic, a bit sort of suffering with fatigue, perhaps. Then on the second session, we did the tapping. Remember, for people that are struggling, they can't do the internal work because it just sets off that pattern, so to bang it. So we stimulate the points, but stay with something physical so that we're not tuned into the energy. We can't tune on the energy while we're hitting ourselves, right? Not very easily. So that brings us into the body. It's difficult to do Qigong while someone's slapping you around the face, right? It's kind of hard to concentrate. So it's that kind of idea while we're banging on the body just to sort of drop that Qi out and disperse it. Then I showed you some work to touch the more subtle levels of Qi, just playing a little bit to feel, to be able to grasp that Qi that rises up in the body within Chinese medicine or within Qigong heat rising, and combine that with a balancing exercise from a very simple exercise from the Hunyuan, just to harmonize those qualities. Particularly good for people with, I should have said, reversal of stomach Qi as well, if you know what that is. Can be quite useful to rectify that issue as well, that exercise quite simply. Then today, I've lost track. The first session was on poison fire affecting the heart, wasn't it? Influencing the heart. So we talked about this, which is an issue for a lot of the contemporary sexual practice as much as anything, isn't it? Those kind of schools, people get problems from there. So we looked at the sealing and then the settling and gently warming the jing practice, which is also useful for most people anyway, certainly if they're practicing meditation or alchemy, or even if you get into that age where you think, you know, I might want to consolidate my essence a little bit anyway, because I might be slightly on the further side of the midpoint, shall we say, or something like that. So it can just kind of help to simulate and settle that. So it's quite useful for that anyway. After poison, fire, influence in the heart, why is my memory so bad? That's not good, is it? Then we did walking fire, entering demons, we talked about, discussed that and the nature of what this is, and started to look at the idea of venting heat from the body and releasing it. And then, of course, I had to discuss Chinese medical protocols as well, because you're probably going to need outside assistance if somebody suffers with something like that, which hopefully none of you do. But you can release heat from there. And then in this session, I really just wanted to focus on explaining the Kundalini and looking at a little bit of a practice that can help with those issues that arise from Qigong, from yogic breathing pranayama. Sorry, it's coming up to midnight. My brain's gone. So, do you understand all that? Got all that? Easy enough? There's a few little tools there, a few little things in your repertoire, maybe practices that can assist with certain things. So what I'll do next weekend is I'll visit one of the simpler conditions, which is Chupian, which obviously I forgot, it's quite a major one. It's actually an individual channel reversal. Okay, I'll look at that next time. And then we'll look at possessions and some of the weirder side of things that can go wrong. So we'll look at that next time. And then I'll take these questions. Basic question, that's all right, no problem. Basic questions are good when it's coming towards midnight. That's great, actually. It's better than a complicated question, that's for sure. When sitting, we float the tissues and rise the Shen, but sink the Qi, Tiantu, and the scapula. Is that correct? When sitting, we float the tissues and rise the Shen. Yeah, float the tissues, rise the Shen, but sink the Qi, Tiantu, and the scapula. Float the tissues is an unusual one. I mean, they stretch and they open more than float. Float I would associate with the bones generally, actually. Sink the Qi, Tiantu, and the scapula, is that correct? Other than that, yeah. For finding sink and form, any tips to help the Qi from rising as I float the tissue, Shen, and hold form? Yeah, okay, because, I mean, this is really... When they say essentially that the Qi sinks and the Shen raises or elevates, they don't mean the Shen location-wise lifts. Ultimately, what they're saying is there's a mental quality that the Qi has to drop, the Qi has to sink and release, but the mind has to stay alert. The focus and the concentration has to be stable, so that's how the Shen rises. So the issue that people have is when they focus to rise the Shen, sort of stay alert, ultimately that can raise the Qi because you kind of got that stress mechanism. And then when they sink the Qi, often it will sink the mind to create a kind of dullness, which is really the kind of stereotype for what you expect, isn't it? When you see people who do meditation, finish on a stereotypical note, that you see people who are spiritual practitioners or whatever, or trying to convey that image either, they come out of meditation and they speak ever so slowly, as if the Shen is really settled, and they move slow and they move very relaxed, and it drives me insane. If I listen to them talk, I have to put it on 3 times the speed just to even sort of be able to listen to what they're saying. But it represents one of two things. One, they're either putting on an act, or two, they've accidentally sunk the Shen when they sunk the Qi. The two are combined, they haven't separated them. Because all of the practitioners that I've met that I would consider to be at a very high level are actually incredibly alert and very, very alive and quite animated when they move, and they fast, and they're kind of impassioned when they speak and they do things, because the Qi has sunk and the Shen has stayed risen. So the alertness is still there. They are separated from one another. The Qi hasn't raised with the Shen to create a kind of panicky, fluttery kind of mode. They have separated, yeah. So the Qi is sunk and active, but the Shen is raised, yeah. So really it's about that, Felicia. It's not that basic a question. That's actually quite complex. But yeah, that's what it is. It's about the alertness and the stability of mind while you sink the Qi. People saying thank you, you're welcome. Can you shortly elaborate on the reversal of stomach Qi? New term to me. Well, actually, with reversal of stomach Qi, that is something you can find on the internet. Probably if you look it up, if you look up Chinese medicine reversal of stomach Qi, you'll probably find something. but as opposed to some of the other stuff I've talked about in this course. But essentially what we're talking about symptom-wise is going to be things like acid reflux, or that thing where you kind of vomit in your own mouth a little bit, stuff like that, or sometimes you can't swallow or chew because the stomach can't hold the food down. You know, when you eat, it just feels like it gets stuck in the throat sometimes and just kind of stiff. That would be what I would associate with reversal of stomach chi. Extreme versions of it would actually be vomiting or something, but what I was saying was that exercise can help with those kind of things: acid reflux, acid regurgitation, heartburn, and difficulty swallowing. The stomach, curiously, I always like it. One of the functions of the stomach is to hold down the food, which I think is a really nice phrase, because if we think about what that actually means, it is that sensation that when the stomach chi reverses, that you eat and it just feels like it can't go in, it gets stuck in the throat, or something gets swollen in this area. It means the stomach chi is not holding down the food. So it can help with fixing that, basically. Were there any other issues relevant to women? Well, yeah, all of them, you know, males and females. The only exception, like I was saying, is the poison fire influence in the heart tends to be males, just because of the way that Qigong works. I mean, women could get it. It is possible, but it's less likely. It's less likely just because of the way the mechanism works within the system. Nothing to do with personalities or anything like that. It's just simply because of the way that Qigong functions. It circles in a different way in women, right? I mean, you store a lot of the Qigong in the chest as opposed to down underneath the perineum, so that different location means a different kind of trigger for conditions. But other than that, illnesses don't discriminate. All right then, guys, thank you very much. Sorry if anything I talked about was difficult. Maybe some of the traumas or some of the things around poison fire affecting the heart or anything. I don't mean it to be, and sometimes I know for some people it's not pleasant to come along on an event about Qigong and hear about unpleasant things, but obviously we're talking about deviations, so I hope I wasn't too flippant in my nature or whatever, or my humour wasn't too dark or whatever. But yeah, I think it's good that we explore these things and look at them a little bit. And next time I'll explore the weird stuff. Let's get strange. Pixies and fairies. I don't know anything about those, but we'll talk about something similar. All right. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to go get some sleep because it's now the next day and I have to fly to another country. Take it easy, guys. Oh, after a PCR test.